properties of our audio and basically scrub through and make changes or switch out specific phonemes by just clicking on one of these over here that we've already mapped, right? So again, we're able to basically use the sound editor to make any kind of changes to phonemes that are already been mapped, right? So as I mentioned a couple of lessons ago when we initially mapped out our phonemes by going into the lip sync mapping dialog box, I talked about while it's great that we have all of these different options that are designated for specific phonemes, they don't really give us enough room to include all 9 of our basic phonemes, okay? So basically we don't have the ability to include these two right here, our W and Q phoneme mouth expression and then our L mouth expression. So the W and Q one basically allows us to convey the sound of w, or qu, and then the L one basically is for the la, and can also be substituted for d, or th. So being able to have these two, I think, are very important. So it's kind of a shame that we're unable to include them in our initial mapping of our phonemes. Now, that's not to say that we can't use them, and this is where we want to start talking about manually editing phonemes, okay? And so, again, if we scrub through and play our audio.
Digital tutors, teaching the people who make movies and games.
I'm seeing a couple of areas where I may want to include kind of that L sound or maybe even use that WQ mouth expression. So maybe right around here. So right around here we're saying people. There's a couple of spots here where I may want to include that la sound kind of right there on the end of people. So right about there, as I scrub through and listen to that, I'm thinking I may be able to bring in that L phoneme mouth expression, probably on frame 45, okay? So there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could make sure that we're in our data view, and if you don't see that, you can just click on that button right there. And as we scrub through these different drawings right here, or these different drawings for our mouth expressions, we can see how the name will change over here, okay? So again, frame 45 maybe is where I want to make that change. And so you can see how it's changing right here. So what we could do is we could just hover over that and scrub through them and choose that L one right there. And you can see how that cell basically changes. Okay, so that's not too bad. Let's actually go ahead and play back through that.
Digital tutors, teaching the people who make movies and games.
So it's a very subtle change, but I think it makes a big difference, right? And we wouldn't be able to include this phoneme if we had went through the layer properties for our audio layer and did that through the sound element editor, okay? So this is where being able to have the ability to manually do this makes a big difference. Let's go ahead and kind of scrub back through that same area once again. And even on this frame right here, frame 44, the frame right before it, I may not want to have the mouth as open right there. So people, I may want to kind of have a smaller mouth expression. This is where we could maybe use that Q or that WQ mouth expression to kind of help transition into that L1 right there. So again, we could come over to the data view, or we could go into our library view, right? And in our library view, if we click on our mouth layer, we can see basically how we have the ability to switch through all of those different mouth expressions. So we could just kind of search for the mouth expression that we want. So what I want is that one right there, the WQ one. You can see how it changes the cell right there. So again, we could come back through and play.
Digital tutors, teaching the people who make movies and games.
So it felt like a little bit smoother transition. Again, it's a subtle change, but it makes a big difference. Just one frame for something like this can make a huge difference. And so again, we could kind of go through and not only do this with phonemes that we weren't able to include in our initial mapping, but also just for any additional ones that we want to change that were already mapped, right? So we don't have to actually go through the sound element editor to do that. Now, one thing that I do want to stress, and I kind of mentioned this at the end of the previous lesson, is that if you are going to go through the sound element editor and make any changes with these phonemes that you already have mapped, do that first, okay? Then do your manual editing down here like we just did. If you basically do manual editing first and then you try to come in here into your sound element editor and make any kind of changes with these phonemes you already have mapped and then remap, just as we did in the previous lesson, it's going to basically remove all of those manual changes that you've already done. So personally, for me, I kind of prefer just mapping out the phonemes to begin with and letting them basically sync up to the audio and kind of avoiding the sound editor altogether and just going through here and manually making changes that I want to. That's just my own personal preference. However, the sound editor, just as I mentioned in the previous lesson, is very handy because you can go through and basically make multiple changes on numerous different frames, basically going through switching them out on numerous different frames and then remapping, and all those changes take effect at once. So there's kind of pros and cons. It really depends on what you're most comfortable with and the level of control that you feel most comfortable in having in lip syncing your audio, right? Okay, so in our next lesson, we're going to just talk about another way that we can manually switch out different phonemes here for our lip synced animation by jumping